Welcome to In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson. Join Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible, both from Milligan College, as they bring you their thoughts and knowledge of the study of the Sunday School lesson for the day. Now, here is Dr. Gwaltney.
Welcome again to In the Word. We're so glad you have joined us. Today's lesson is a continuation of a study from John's Gospel, the last chapter. And some of you may not have been with us last Sunday, and so I'm going to ask my colleague Lee Magnus to do a little bit of a summarization of what went before, and then we'll carry on and with today's lesson.
Good.
Lee, summarize it if you would.
All right, these last two chapters of John are truly beautiful. They all tell stories after the resurrection of Jesus.
Yes.
The first two are empty tomb stories.
And that's in chapter 20,
In chapter
right?
20, at the beginning there, Mary Magdalene and some of the other women followers of Jesus go to the tomb to embalm Jesus' corpse and surprisingly find the doorway open and the tomb empty. And then Peter and John, when they learn that the tomb is empty, run back as well and also find the tomb empty. Then we get a series of appearance stories where Jesus encounters various ones of his followers. The first one is to Mary Magdalene, where he meets her there outside the tomb, and
she's weeping.
She's weeping, struggles, doesn't realize it's him at first, but there's a very tender reunion scene there in which he calls her by name and then commissions her to go and confirm to other disciples about his resurrection. Then there's an appearance story with Jesus and 10 of the disciples.
Who's missing?
Well,
Obviously,
Judas is missing, but Thomas was also not there.
Yes.
Then there's another appearance story, this time with Thomas present, and here's where we get the famous "unless I see the nail prints in his hands" story, and the promise that Jesus makes that of a blessing on those who believe in him, even though that they haven't physically seen the evidences of his death. Then we get the appearance story that we're studying the second half of today,
right,
in chapter 21, where Jesus, having instructed the disciples to go back to Galilee and wait for him there, shows up at the seaside of the Sea of Galilee and feeds his disciples and
fish and bread,
like the feeding of the 5,000.
Yes.
But they're kind of starting back over again on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, just as they did when he originally called them.
Yes.
And it's the continuation of that story that we'll be talking about today.
Right. And I think it's really interesting and provocative that as far as John's Gospel is concerned, it closes where the picking of disciples began.
Yes.
So it's like closed the circle.
Yeah. This ending goes back to the beginning, not only of Jesus calling the disciples, but the beginning of this gospel.
Right.
It goes back, and you're right, makes full circle there. Now, when Jesus originally called the disciples, the fishermen disciples, he used an analogy of fishing. He said, I will make you fishers of men, of human beings.
Yes.
Here, when he recalls them, as it were, kind of renews his call, he switches metaphors away from the fishing industry and goes to the shepherding business.
That's right.
And so we're going to get metaphors of shepherding here, which is, I find, fascinating because that is a theme that traces all the way through Scripture, all the way back into the Old Testament.
And beyond.
Okay, even beyond. So this was a metaphor, you're saying, even preceding
the time that
of the writing of
the writing of the Bible. Yes,
yeah.
I'll point that out when we get there.
Okay.
Okay. But why don't we get to the scripture for this morning?
Great. Very good.
And we'll move on then, and we'll point out the interesting possibilities for this story.
Well, this week we begin in John chapter 21, verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you're old, you'll stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who's going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus didn't say that he wouldn't die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?" This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written.
End of the Gospel of John.
End of the Gospel, all the way to the end.
Well, it looked as though the Gospel was going to end at the end of chapter 20.
Yeah.
But now we get what seems to be an add-on.
Yeah, but it would have been
an epilogue.
It would have been a very important add-on for John because it was an appearance there at the Sea of Galilee that he himself experienced personally and involved a conversation about him and his future.
What was John's position in the cycling around of history from a Christian perspective at the time when he was becoming an old man, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the issue of the second coming of Jesus had become a matter of discussion, and that seems to be part of what's going on at the end of this passage.
Well, we have several parts to this conclusion of the story, and why don't we take the first part?
Yeah.
Discuss it.
Verse 15 makes reference to the meal, the breakfast that Jesus had served them with bread and fish baked over a charcoal fire. But that's over now, and Jesus is ready to shift from being host to being teacher.
Yes.
and to call. And so he turns his attention directly to Simon Peter. All those 7 disciples are there in attendance, and says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?"
Now, in the first place, the name John, as the father of Andrew and Peter, I don't think we've heard that anywhere else before.
No, and it's a little confusing because a number of the finest old manuscripts of John don't have the word John there. They have the word Jonah.
Okay, and that's the name. That's the father in Matthew.
Yes, Simon Bar-Jonah.
Yeah.
Simon Bar-Jonah.
Bar is Aramaic for son of.
Okay.
And Jonah could be morphed into the name John. The name John is Yohanan. And the name Jonah would be pronounced Yonah.
So they're very close.
They're very close.
Yeah. I don't want to get off the track on that. We have such little time to talk about this wonderful passage. But it has always struck me that kind of symbolically, Peter was kind of a son of Jonah. I'm thinking now of the Old Testament prophet Jonah, who struggled between faithfulness and unfaithfulness.
Yes, true.
In his relationship with God, and Peter kind of struggled in that same way.
Yes.
You know, so that's all I'll say about it now.
Yeah, it's just an interesting thing that we have a little confusion about. But there's another confusing factor in this question.
Yes.
The one thing that this question adds that the following questions do not have: do you love me more than these? More than what?
Yeah, that's a very confusing wording. In English, at least, it could, well, even in Greek, it could imply three different questions. One, do you love me more than these disciples love me?
Yes.
I don't like that interpretation because I don't think Jesus would have set up a competition among his disciples.
In fact, there was an argument among the sons of thunder, James and John, about this very thing, and Jesus tried to...
Jesus shut it down.
Shut it down.
Oh, very strongly.
Yes.
So I reject that one. I don't think it means, do you love me more than these other 6 people love me? Another possible interpretation, do you love me more than you love these disciples? In other words, is your loyalty to me as your Lord stronger than your loyalty to your fishing buddies?
Yeah.
That's a possibility. Another one that is very appealing to me, yet a different interpretation, do you love me more than you love the things here? The fish, the boat, the nets, all that. In other words...
the career.
The career. Jesus, at the beginning, had called Peter, and Peter and Andrew and James and John had left their nets, it says, and had left their profession, in other words, in order to follow Jesus. And maybe Jesus is asking the same thing here.
Yeah.
Since Peter has gone back fishing, he says, okay, are you prepared to leave this again and be my apostles?
Yeah, well, and the first question, way back at the beginning, was, I will make you fishers of men. And they identified with that.
Yeah.
So I think you're right in terms of, are you prepared to leave fishing and that kind of a career? And you would pass into history and not be remembered for your Christian commitment, but at the same time, you would not suffer what you're going to have to suffer if you follow me.
True. Well, the next, the conversation then develops.
We have 3 questions.
We have 3 questions with 3 answers and then 3 charges or commandments. Commissionings.
We can't help but note that there's a difference in the verbs that are for love that are used.
Yeah.
And let's go through them real quickly. The first question Jesus asks uses agapao, the verb that we are aware of in New Testament context. Peter responds with the verb phileo.
Right.
Jesus, then, the second question uses agapao. Peter responds with phileo. And the third time, Jesus then changes the verb to phileo, and Peter answers with phileo.
Right.
Now, what is the meaning of this?
Well, one way to approach this is the way that the NIV translation approaches it, which is to say these words are just synonyms. And so...
And we know in Koine Greek they are.
They are. And so we're just going to translate them all love. But They don't make that decision, for instance, with the difference between lambs and sheep. They don't say, well, lambs are sheep, so we're just going to translate it sheep. So I think it is worth looking at and saying, why does Jesus say agapao and Peter respond with phileo, and why does Jesus then change to phileo? I'd say there are two main ways to approach this.
Yes.
One is to think that agapao is a very important kind of sacrificial love to which Christians are called. It's the character of God.
It's the character of God's love.
Of Jesus' love.
Yes.
And it should be the character of Christians'
love
right.
for one another.
Right. It's a sacrificial love.
Yes.
And in this context, Peter's sacrificial death is foreshadowed down in verse 18. So maybe that is the way we should think about agapao. The other verb, phileo, is most commonly used for a strong love of friendship or brotherly love.
Like as in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, the friend, a brotherly kind of
love.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so one interpretation is that agapao is kind of a stronger love, a higher love, and that Peter won't commit to that, and Jesus finally kind of downshifts and says, well, if I can't get you to commit to a agapao love, will you at least commit to a phileo love?
Yeah.
Now that's one interpretation. The other interpretation is that these kinds of love are not ranked. They're all equally important in the Christian life.
Yes, because Jesus, as a matter of fact, uses phileo to express friendship and love among friends, mm-hmm. and sometimes it refers to people using phileo to describe the relationship among Christians.
Exactly. And so I think in Peter's mind, he may be saying something like, you want to know if I would sacrifice my life for you? Yes, I will. In fact, I'll more than just sacrifice my life for you. I'll be committed to you like a bosom brother.
Yeah,
right. a committed. So that's the other way to interpret it, that it's Jesus isn't downshifting at all when he does that. So
it's very interesting, though, to note that whatever it means, Jesus comes to the same level where Peter is comfortable.
Right. And Jesus doesn't seem put off by Peter's commitment.
No,
because he renews his challenge and call to Peter after each of these questions and answers.
Yeah, feed the lambs, mm-hmm. tend the sheep, and feed the sheep.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think that's where we need to put the focus.
Right.
What Jesus is looking at here is not just getting a commitment of love from Peter. Do you love me? Yes. Okay, good. What he's doing is calling him, he's giving him a renewal of his call to ministry.
Now, Peter is put off by this.
Yeah, he gets his feelings hurt. The Greek verb means grieved. It's a very strong word. It's in verse 17, grieved, hurt. But notice, notice it says he was grieved because Jesus asked him this question a third time.
Yes.
That's the key. Not because he changed the verb.
No.
But because, and don't you think it reflects on the denial?
I think it's Peter denied Jesus 3 times. First a straight denial, then a denial with an oath, mm-hmm. and he's not cussing.
Right.
As I swear by the temple, mm-hmm. that I don't know this man, mm-hmm. and then the strongest of all is to bring down a curse upon yourself. May God strike me dead if I know this man. Mm-hmm. And so oath and curse are not cussing, but it's it's swearing an oath and then calling on God to end his life if he's lying.
So Peter was undoubtedly laboring under a good deal of guilt from that.
Absolutely.
And so Jesus' threefold call to commitment here not only holds him accountable for his denial, his threefold denial,
yes,
but it also says, I'm ready to move past that if you're ready to renew your commitment to ministry in my name.
Exactly.
And Peter is, and Jesus is.
In a way, this is a call of Jesus to Peter to put Peter's denial of Jesus behind him.
Yeah, I think so.
And to move ahead.
Yeah.
And how is he supposed to do that? By following Jesus.
Yeah. It's so interesting here to see this theme of shepherding in the Bible. Let's chat about that just a second,
sure.
right now, maybe, before we run out of time.
Yes.
In the Old Testament, God is referred to as a shepherd, right?
And Ezekiel.
Okay, and then we also have Psalm 23.
Oh, absolutely.
The Lord is my shepherd. I think rulers were expected to be like shepherds of their people.
Yes.
Kings.
And we can go into non-biblical documentation. For example, the giant code of Hammurabi carved on a big black stone in the epilogue. Hammurabi describes himself as the shepherd of the people.
And he was a Babylonian king.
Babylonian king, yes.
Yeah, okay.
In roughly 1750 BC.
Way back.
Yes.
So God is referred to as a shepherd. The kings of Israel were expected to be shepherds, like other kings were.
Yes.
Then when we get to the New Testament, of course, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd.
Yes.
And then 1 Peter, which we assume was written by Peter, calls on elders, Christian leaders of local congregations, to be shepherds, that is, to tend the flock.
Right.
And what we have here then is the connection of that link. Jesus is a shepherd. Peter calls on Christian leaders to be shepherds. Now, what's the missing link? Jesus called on Peter to be a shepherd of the flock.
To feed and to tend.
Take care of.
Yeah, guard even.
Yeah. And this is the passage that supplies us with that missing link.
Very important. Yeah.
This whole conversation about, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Feed my flock, is climaxed in my mind by the last words of verse 19. When all this was said and done, he said to Peter, follow me.
Yes.
Which are the words that Jesus used when he first called the disciples, at the very beginning of his ministry, 3 years gone. And it's as if Jesus is kind of taking them back to the beginning and let's renew our commitment here.
Right.
Are you going to follow me or not?
But there's one remaining issue. And it was, the Gospel of John was written somewhere probably in the 90s.
Very late
AD,
in the first century.
Very late. And that issue comes up, and it's the last issue that the Gospel of John deals with, beginning in verse 20, is it? 20.
Yeah.
Now Peter turns and he saw John. And he then asked Jesus, and John was following along after them. And this is the one
verse 21 is the question.
So he says, Peter asked the question, who is going, Lord, what about this man?
What about him? Is he also going to die
Yeah.
And glorify God in his death?
Yes.
And Jesus answers,
If.
It's a big if. If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You need to focus on following me.
Don't worry about him. Worry about yourself.
Yeah. we do have a tendency to compare ourselves to other Christians and say, are they going to have the same suffering or the same success or the same whatever as we do? And Peter seems to be succumbing to that temptation here. And Jesus says, you know what? That's not for you to worry about.
And we hear that there was a rumor in verse 23 among the believers. Now that's a typical term for Christians. And that this disciple would not die before Jesus returned.
Yeah.
Well, he was getting very old. Some say that he was near 100 years old. And but then the writer, who is this man who's very, very elderly, corrects that and says that Jesus didn't say he wouldn't die, but if I want him to remain alive, what is that to you?
Yeah, I think maybe what's going on here is that late in the first century, late in John's life, people were saying, well, John's getting old and about to die, so Jesus must be about to return. And people would say, well, where do you get that? And they said, well, Jesus said that he would come back before this man died.
Right.
And John, who's the subject of this rumor, this misunderstanding, wants to try to clarify that here. And he said, no, no, no. He didn't say he would come back before I died. He just said, if John lives till the second coming, that's not your business. That's not for you to worry about. Peter. Yeah. But he didn't make that promise.
Right.
So he seems to be trying to tamp down the rumors about the return of Jesus late in his life.
You know, let me read this passage out of 1 Peter chapter 5.
Good.
Because I think it is not only a beautiful statement, but it ties this whole business together.
Good.
And it goes like this. So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that will be revealed. Tend the flock of God. Exactly the terminology we have here. Tend the flock of God that is your charge, not by constraint, but willingly, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not by domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd is manifested, you will obtain the unfading crown of glory.
It's a beautiful passage.
The chief shepherd.
That you're bringing us back to Jesus as the shepherd.
Right.
Yeah. And this wonderful post-resurrection appearance reminds us that the reality of the resurrection is crucial and important. But living in the afterglow of the resurrection means for us ministry, a call to tend the flock of God. Sometimes
we think that this gospel story is the birth and life and death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus, and that's where the story stops. That's not the gospel. We have the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus and the exaltation of Jesus on high. And on that theme, we must leave you, but we'll continue next week. And we're going to go to the book of Revelation, I believe.
You're right.
So join us in Revelation, and we'll look for you next week. God bless you.
This has been In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson with Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible from Milligan College, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible of Milligan College. Join us again next week for another lesson from the International Bible School lesson text. This has been a production of the First Christian Church Television Ministries.